You are now tuned into the Hopeful Workspace podcast. You will hear stories of real people from all over who are dealing with job loss or tough job situations. No companies are named, and the people are kept anonymous. Well, except me. I'm Naisha. Join me as we listen to the real stories of real people and take what you need from their situations to grow. Remember, what you're experiencing is just a season, and there'll be many more good ones after this. Hey, I am here today with Carl Alexander. How are you doing today, Carl?
I'm doing good. It's summer in Canada, so it's warm and we don't have to live in our igloos. So I'm really happy with that. So I'm doing great. And how about you?
I am doing awesome. It is also very hot. I'm in the southern United States. It's too hot, actually, but I'll enjoy the sun while I can. I
Yeah.
want you to introduce yourself to our guests.
Okay. I'm Carl Alexander. I mostly hang out in the WordPress community, but I've been on my own for, oh gosh, I think 13 years now. I do all sorts of consulting. I do fractional CTO, product development, disaster recovery. Basically, if you need something technical, I might be a good fit for you. And it's not, even though I hang out a lot in the WordPress community, it's more like I call it WordPress adjacent. So it's sometimes related to WordPress, sometimes it's not. Um, but it's not really directly related to working inside WordPress per se. So that's what I do, and I also have a little product that I'm trying to grow, which will be relevant to what we're going to discuss today, called Emir. It's a serverless platform for WordPress. Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Carl's really cool and really smart, and I'm so happy to have him talking to us today. Um,
Yeah.
and just letting you all know, the topic of today is workism. Now, I'd never heard of this before until I was speaking with Carl. And workism is it's a term coined by Derek Thompson, and he wrote this in an article by The Atlantic. Um, it's his headline on it, or his reasoning or definition is: workism is rooted in the belief that employment can provide everything we have historically expected from organized religion. Blew my mind. And Carl just said he could talk about it for so long, and I just really I wanted him to talk about it on our podcast.
Mhm.
And yeah, Carl, I want you to just go. I want you to tell me, like, when you first discovered this term, and just talk about it. And yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna shill Derek a bit more. He has a podcast called Plain English. It's one of the few podcasts that I listen all the time. I'm like kind of a polymath, so I love learning about a wide variety of things. So he does an excellent podcast if you like learning about random topics or random societal issues. But yeah, no. So I'd also never really heard the term workism till I read that article. But for me, it was something that I kind of like already knew internally, um, because I've had that experience. That's why, like, I was listening to your podcast and we were talking, and I was just like, oh, I've been through this. Like, that's why I'm on my own now. Yeah, because I kind of figured that out 13 years ago. Um, that it's really hard to balance passion and work,
Hmm.
because a lot of programmers love their work. And like, we got into programming not just because it was a cool job that paid well. We got into programming because it was just cool and we love building stuff
Yes.
and creating things. It's a lot of I don't know about you, but like, I had some Legos when I was a kid, and I loved building stuff with Legos. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
you'd get the set, but after that, you build stuff. Like, you could create things, and I always felt like programming was kind of like digital Legos. Like, you could build anything. You could build a website. You could build an application. You can build something for your phone. It's insane. So you love it. So you love the work, and then you start working for a company. Obviously, you love your work, so you want to work a lot. And then, a lot of developers were, a lot. You're kind of not naive. I don't want to say naive, but you're new, right? And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
this is great, and people are like, this is a family and everything. And then you're like, you get really invested, and you just start giving. Like you start giving and giving and giving to this company, and they'll take. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's it's not anybody's fault, but I don't blame the companies for doing it, because like, you're motivated. They're happy to have an employee that's super motivated, but it can lead into these kind of, I mean, it's kind of an abusive relationship, right?
Yes.
It's not an abusive in a way that's like makes you feel bad, but they just take, right? They just take and
Yes.
take and take, and then when it's time to say, like, okay, I need something from you, well, then you realize that you're actually not in a reciprocal relationship, right? You're not
Yes.
it, right? And that kind of is the that was kind of what happened with me, and that's what I resonated with your story a lot, because that's like kind of central a bit to workism, because workism is about this idea that we've replaced a lot of our passion, our free time with this idea of work. But the problem is that when you're in, obviously there's structure, there's like power dynamics in organized religion as well, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not your livelihood. you know
Yes.
and so when you realize one day that you're in kind of this like relationship that's like abusive, because that, I mean, so actually, I didn't say, we talked, I'm from Canada, but I'm actually from Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
So for people that don't know about it, Montreal is basically the gaming industry mecca. I think
Ooh.
outside of California, there isn't a place with more gaming studios than most of my friends that work in programming here work in the gaming industry. And the gaming industry is notorious for abusing people.
Yes, it is.
Um, and and that's like the perfect encapsulation of this, because every friend of mine, everybody that works in video games, they love video games. They just want to build video games. They're so happy to be able to work in something that they're so passionate about. But these companies, this is where you hear about crunch time
Mm-hmm.
and all of it, like crazy overworking to like meet these deadlines, and it's just like really hard, and you get stuck in there, and you're like, this is like the relationship you have. So it's it's really important to keep that in mind. So yeah, I had that experience myself, because I was really passionate about a company and I wanted them to do well and everything, and you start hitting issues with management or whatnot, and I was just like, yeah, at some point I was just, it just, something broke a bit, like you were
Mm-hmm.
saying, right? Like, I mean, you ended up being let go, and that kind of like triggered, right? That triggered this kind of questioning, right? In you,
Yes, it
right?
did.
Because yeah.
Twice for me, twice in 6 months. So it
Yeah.
it it the first one already, it was already like, what, I'd never been fired before in my life, and I've never been laid off. People told me to make the distinction. To me, there was no distinction at the time. I was like, I'm gone. Like, what is the distinction? But I know it's one. But that had
Yeah.
never happened to me before in my life. So it was crazy. And I think the second one was the one that truly broke me, because I was at a company that I took that job out of desperation because of my first layoff, and I did not really
Hmm.
want to be at the company. There were some, I don't want to call it red flags, but there were
There
warning
were flags.
signs.
We'll call
Yeah,
them
there were
flags.
flags. There were flags when I first started that I probably shouldn't stay, but what do you do when you need the money? And when I was
Hmm.
laid off from there, right after like 90 days, I would that's when it broke. I was like, what am I doing? Because I did a lot for my second job. I did a lot for both. But the second job, oh man, like, I to keep up with all of my commitments and work, I would get hotels in other cities just to make just to be able to work remotely and make all their deadlines instead of using PTO or flex time. I just wanted to be present and I wanted to be a good worker. And I was spending all this money to be a good
Yeah.
worker. And I was like, for what? What did I end up with? So, oh my gosh, yes, it
Yeah.
really did. It broke me. And you also hit on something really, 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 really. I think that was my aha moment when you sent the article. Something that this is what blew my mind the most about
Yeah.
workism. Um, Derek talks about how it's what we look for in work these days is what people traditionally look for in organized religion. And for
Hmm.
me, I'm someone who was born in the southern United States, and it's a very religious area in the
Hmm.
United States. And I do not participate in organized religion um, anymore, not since I was a teenager. So for when I heard that and I read that, it like a light like went
Yeah.
on in my mind because I was like, maybe that's why I was doing so much at these jobs because I don't have an organized religion that I go flock to anymore. So maybe I was super hardcore looking for that in work. And when I didn't have it anymore, something in me just kind of what's going on? It kind of dissolved. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And see, I was brought up Catholic. I went to church a bit, but it was
mhm,
never a big part of my life. But one of the, again, I think it was Derek Thompson, but
mhm.
that did a talk. But it's I think they called them third spaces. But basically, a lot of society is losing what they call third spaces. So like
Yes.
church clubs, like the Rotary Club, or just like I'm just thinking. I used to go train at the. I love weightlifting. I do that 5 times a week, and I used to do at the YMCA.
Mhm.
And the YMCA just did not survive COVID.
Mm.
Like the institution in Quebec is really a very, like, it's a fraction of itself now. There's only a few of them that are left open. But I was thinking of, like, I remember I was going every day, and you had elderly people going there and meeting up and like playing board games, and yeah, they'd go train and swim, but they were just hanging out there, right?
Mhm.
And that space is gone,
Mm.
so
Mhm.
it's it like, you can, one thing that I find interesting with a lot of these topics is you can find a lot of second order effects too. Like, like, I like I like joking that because I don't work full time, but I'm like boomer retired. But even the idea of boomer retirement is actually a bit like, I'm just having this epiphany right now, FYI. Like, this is a
Oh my
live
gosh.
this is but think about it, like, of your parents, or parents that have trouble retiring, that they just like they just continue working, or they work part-time and things like that. It's because they don't have a space to go, right?
Wow.
Like,
Mhm.
right? Because before, like, if you think, I'm not very nostalgic for like the 60s or the 70s, but when you retired, you still had all these clubs that we were talking about, and then they could.
Mhm.
So that, to me, that's actually like a bit of a larger angle of this workism thing that Derek doesn't talk about, but I'm just like thinking right now, is like, maybe that's why a lot of people have trouble retiring too, right?
Yes.
Because your job, your work has just taken over so much of your, like, not just identity, but just your life, right? Like, what do you
Yes.
do with all of this time that you dedicated once it's over, right? And it's a real
Yeah.
struggle. And I remember uh when when my parents retired, my dad retired first, and I wasn't really worried about my dad because my dad paints and he does all this. He goes swimming. He already had a lot of activities that he did, but
Mhm.
my mom didn't. So I was really worried. I was just like, what is she gonna do? Is she gonna, like, go crazy or something when she retired? And
Mhm.
she ended up being okay, actually, but I was just, it wasn't obvious to me, right? She ended up doing a lot of volunteer work. at hospitals and things like that. But it's just like when your life, like this idea of workism is that you give so much space to your job in terms of identity, but also your time and your passion and everything.
Mhm.
And there's nothing, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I think it's really important and to be self-aware of it and
Yeah.
be able to catch yourself, because like we were talking, the reality is that a workplace could tell you they're the most awesome place in the world and they'll respect you and things like that, but when it's going to get really tough, you're not going to be, all those things they told you are not going to be true anymore.
They go
And
right out the
the way they
window.
go right out the window, and it's not true for everyone. That's why I was talking, like there's I know he stopped investing, but there was Tyler, I think, I forget his family, but his family name, I think it was Tyler. He was doing something called Calm Companies. Like he had the Calm Fund and he was investing in Calm companies. So
Mhm.
companies that were growing slowly, methodologically, not taking, because a lot of the firing, at least in the tech industry right now, is because like during COVID, they were like, oh, we need to hire a whole bunch of people. And then they overhired and they're like, okay, see ya. And then they're just
Yeah.
like lay off, lay off, lay off, lay off, lay off. And I'm really, I really pay attention to business owners, because like I'm trying to stay a one person company because I don't want that. I don't want to have that responsibility. But
Mhm.
if I was, I would try to be. I know of two agencies in WordPress. One's actually in Montreal that they seem to be doing good and respectful. And then another one that's really large that I don't want to name, um, but I remember talking with their CEO, and he told me he had a year of runway in salaries for every employee he hired.
Wow.
So that requires real, that like that's why it's not every company that's bad. Like I think there's like, you can do that, but I think you have to think, and this is where I was 13 years ago, is I wanted to
Mhm.
start a business because I was, how do you build a business where you like treat employees like really like, you can't always be like, at the end of the day, if you can have a year of runway, but at some point that runway is going to go, right? So it's
Yeah.
like you have to, and you're going to have to make hard decisions. But how do you build a company where you actually really, what are the systems that you would have in place? What are the types of things you would do to like look like you're a company that really values their employees and really wants to give them like financial safety, because that's really what
Mhm.
it is about. Because we joke about that. Like I never know each month where my money's going to come from, right? I've
Mm.
been doing it for
Mhm.
13 years, but I still don't know like each month. So, but you trade one stress for another, right? Like
Yes.
you might be at a job and you never know if you're going to lose it, and that's stressful too. So like how do you give somebody a workplace where they can have this financial safety? Because I think for me at least, um I I've had a period of my life where I didn't grow up poor, but I had a period of my life where I was like, I lived off, like for years off very little, and
Mhm.
it just really stayed with me. Like financial safety is really important. How do you offer that to your employees? How do you, because when you invest in your employees, it really pays off, but it's hard, and that's the reality. And workism kind of is this idea that you have blinders on, right? Like you
Mhm.
put all this investment in, and they just are happy to give you lip service to that.
Yes.
You have to like look at what are they actually doing about that, and that's hard, right? So that's why I'm always like with people, like be careful, don't overcommit. Now I'm just always like, be careful, don't overcommit,
Mhm.
know your limits, because I was, my story with that was like, I was showing up because I was in meetings all day. I showed up like at 6 a.m. to do work,
Mhm.
the work I was supposed to do, and then I would stay after 5 to do more work. and then I'd come in on the weekends.
Yep. 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 Yep.
And it was insane. And it was great because I was getting promoted and stuff like that, but I wasn't getting a salary bump out of it. It was great for my ADHD polymath side. I was like, okay, well, I'm a programmer, I'm a team lead, I'm a business analyst, I'm a project manager now. It's like great, but at some point you're just like, you start investing in the company and then you're like, okay, well, I want to make this place better. And then they're like, no, like, we're not going to do any of that. And then I'm like, okay, why am I here?
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of what broke with me, because I was just like, ironically, it's this, I've been gone for 13 years, but I still know people that are still in that company and it never
Mhm.
got better.
Mm. That is a long time to not get better, but that's the reality of a lot of people and a lot of
Yeah.
companies and a lot of
Yeah.
owners. And you brought up so many good points. I want to touch on a few
Yeah.
things you
Go,
talked
go, go.
about. So when you talk about the loss of third spaces, that's something that we talk about a lot here, especially for children and teenagers. But
Hmm.
and that's the main one, because where can parents go? Where can kids go? There's so many places that are becoming more like no kids, no teenagers, and things like that. But when you brought up the fact that there's work and then there's third spaces and where do we go, you brought up a great point for me, because I got into tech and I moved. I was in South Carolina my whole life, not willingly, but I've always wanted to go and live in different places, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And I
Yeah.
finally got to move for the first time in my life out of the state. And it was during COVID. And I was working in tech, so I was making good money, and then I got laid off.
Hmm.
So when I got laid off, I realized, where do I go to make friends here? Because all my friends were online. I was remote working. Like, where's there a space to go that doesn't revolve around alcohol? There's
Yeah.
almost none in my town, in my city, and I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina now. And then there's like, what can I do if I just want to go relax? There are not many places. Luckily we have a lot of greenways. We have a lot of just North Carolina. The Carolinas are very outdoorsy, naturey places and very
Hmm.
beautiful. So, but if you don't like being outside, what do you do? I love being outside, so I love that. But there's also bringing work into those spaces. So I love food. I talk about food a lot, and
Hmm.
I love Asian food the most. It's my favorite food. And there's an Asian
You're not
food
gonna
hall.
get anything out of me, right? I love Asian food too. So
Nice.
I went to Japan. I had my
You
little ramen
did.
place. I had my little ramen place. I went every day. He counted. At some point, he didn't speak any English, but at some point, he was like 50 times. I was like, 50 what? He was like, you've been here 50. And that was over multiple trips. I was like, that's amazing. He's just keeping track. But yeah, of course, like, yeah,
So cool. I was very jealous.
Chinese, Koreans, Vietnamese. I love it all.
I was very jealous. I'm going to just, this is our little side. I
Yeah.
know we're venturing off, but I'm going to
Sidebar.
South
Yeah.
Korea. I'm going to South Korea in September. So I'm
That's
very
great.
excited to eat. Yes. Which I'll tie that in actually to things at the end, but and it'll be a good reason why. But there's a food hall and you can work there. They set up tables and Wi-Fi and like outlets for you to work. And so this food hall I first started going to because it was a source of fun. It was something to do outside of work. I can go get food, and then they had things for children. I don't have children, but I'm just telling people just
Hmm.
because they want to go. But they
Yeah.
had things for everybody. Like, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I was looking for something like this. But then they were also like, you can work here also. And I was like, oh yeah, why not work here? And then like one day I was going to a festival. They had a Japanese festival there, and some of my friends were like, "How did you know about this place?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I work here sometimes." And I thought about it. I was like, "Holy crap! I let work become the place where I was having fun. My third space is not. Is it really still a third space? Because I work there most of the time now, more than I
Yeah.
eat and like go have fun and like find soju and like onigiri and stuff like that. So I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, wow! Like I destroyed my third space, my one third space I had here.
Yeah, I mean it's tricky. It's really tricky because again, like I was thinking, you were explaining things too, and you know me from WordPress, but
Mhm.
WordPress was kind of this kind of relationship too, right? Like I've invested now, not invested, I shouldn't even, but I've volunteered thousands of hours to this community, right?
Mhm.
And unpaid.
Mhm.
And at some point, and this is what's happening with a lot of the organizers, because I wrote articles, I was speaking at 5 to 7 conferences a year. I was paying for my own travel to get there, and I loved it because I was part of this community. But, you know, communities can also take. Like, it's just,
Mhm.
you just have to be careful when you give, basically, is what
Yes.
it comes down to a lot. Is just at some point, every, even communities that are very free flowing and happy, like the WordPress one, they will take.
Mhm.
And you're seeing that a lot when I talk with a lot of long time organizers, like 10 plus years, they're burning out. And because it's just not a healthy relationship. And I tell that to people now. Like I
Mhm.
speak at one, I don't attend that many anymore. I don't, and part of it is just I kind of woke up and I was just like, I'm in the same pattern again, right? So
Yes.
same pattern, different place. And you have to be, that's why I talk a lot about self-awareness, because you have to
Mhm.
sometimes be like, okay, I'm in this. And then you have to look at it and be like, am I okay with this? Like you have to realize that this is not, this is a power relationship, right?
Mhm.
You're not, you're not in, the power you have is you can walk away. So it's harder to do with a job, but at least when you're volunteering, you can walk away, right? And
Yes.
with a job, you just have to start looking for another job, which is like not easy and it's scary and everything, especially right now in tech. But
Crazy right
uh,
now.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
crazy right now. Like I'm always like, well, hopefully I work. Like I said, it's like one stress for another, right? So it's
Mhm.
just I don't know where my money's coming from, but it's like I don't know where the job would come from either. But it's really about all this workism stuff is also about, really, for me anyways, it's about yes, it's like, what is this replacing, but it's also about thinking about these relationships that you have with these communities or workplaces,
Mhm.
and taking stock of it, because sometimes we're so in it, right? That's how it works with abusive relationships. You don't see it while you're in it. It's just once you walk
Mhm.
away, you're like, oh crap, like I was in that. And that can be hard to do. So it's not saying um, it's an easy thing to do. I've been really lucky in my life that I'm very introspective, so
Mhm.
it helps a lot. But it's always worth thinking about what your relationships are to these things where you're giving a lot, and whether you're having the right, if you're doing something that you like, look at yourself and you're like, okay, I am happy, like it makes me happy to
Mhm.
give this much, even though, like, it has to be selfless, like it has to be somewhat selfless, because I do not expect a job to necessarily cover for me, because there's a lot of stuff too
Mhm.
we haven't covered. Like it's just like, the job doesn't have your back. Some systems they sound like good on paper, like unlimited personal time off. It sounds really good on paper, very kind of like psychologically difficult, right? Because if
Oh
nobody's taking
yeah.
any time off, then nobody takes any. And then if you take some, you feel guilty. So it's just, there's a lot in there. So it's just about questioning those things always. And that's what I do a lot with workism and things like that. Cause I'm the type, you know, I've told people like that are like in these kind of abusive work relationships that you should just phone it
Mhm.
in. just phone it in. Just don't stay after work.
Mhm.
Just get in the meetings, do the meetings, do what you, and if they need more, you tell them you can't, like, because otherwise you'll get into these, that's how you get stuck, right?
Yes, it is.
Because then it becomes expected of you.
Yes, it does.
And it becomes expected of you, and then they're like, why are you doing it anymore? I'm like, I shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. But it's hard. Like, I don't know about you, like I'm in, like, I'm super open with this stuff. Like, if you go on my
Mhm.
blog, I talk about autism and ADHD and stuff like that. But like, I'm in therapy. But I'm in therapy because I'm a people pleaser, and that's difficult.
So am I.
So,
Mhm.
if you're a people pleaser, it becomes really hard. You can get yourself into these situations where, I like to use the term, like, you make people comfortable at your own expense.
Yes.
And you will do that with work if you're not careful. You will do that. And I talked about it in the context of consulting. Consulting, you'll over deliver. You'll ask, instead of being like advocating for yourself and say, like, okay, I'd love to do this for you, but this is going to cost you, like, this much more. You just do it for free, and it's just, there's just so much. It's like, there's so many, it's like an onion, right? Like, you peel it.
Mhm.
There's like so many layers to this, but I think the idea with workism is just that we've replaced a lot of this. We've put so much weight into it.
Mhm.
And in a way, at least as a programmer, it's really hard for me to not do that. Like, I love programming. I love the work that I do. So it's a question of balance and introspection and checking in with yourself and being like, okay, can I do this? Am I giving too much? And it's just really, it's just, you have to be kind of a bit more proactive, like, especially as us, like, as people pleasers, because we'll give a lot and then
Mhm.
it becomes expected, and then you're like, I don't know. I don't know if we can swear this. I forgot to ask, so I'll just say you're like effed. Like, you're like
Yeah.
effed.
Yeah.
You're and basically, that's really hard. And I think that's really my takeaway with all of
Mhm.
this, is like, when I was bringing it up to you, is like,
Mhm.
yes, it replaced organized religion, but also it's just, it goes further than that, because we don't have church spaces, we don't have these communities, we don't, and even, like I said, communities can take too much too. Like, it's just
Yes.
because we don't have as many baskets, like, as many options of things, like, we're stuck with these few things, and then if they can, it's very easy to, like, get in a abusive scenario, because we don't have anywhere else we can just be like, okay, well, I'm done with this. I'll go somewhere else, or I'll reduce my time. And it's just like, you're over invested, and it becomes really scary. It's
It
really scary.
does. It is. And one thing I want to tie this all into
Yeah.
workism is a thing. If this is your first time hearing about it, it
Yeah.
it might blow your mind like it did mine. I was like, we have to talk about this immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Exactly. Yeah.
but there are ways to break out from it, and it doesn't have to always stem from a layoff. Mine has kind of come from a layoff. And I talk a lot about how the layoffs have affected me negatively. Did you sneeze? Bless you. Did you sneeze? Cough?
Yeah. No, I coughed.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. But we talk a lot about how, layoffs have negative impacts, but I want to talk about something that's positive, and it kind of goes in with workism. I
Mm-hmm.
was definitely being affected by workism, especially at my previous job. And, when I was laid off from there, again, something broke in me. I was like, okay, I'm not going to jump into another tech company. I'm sorry. I cannot do this. I cannot mentally do this. And I was like, I don't want to give my time like that again. And I don't want to be the one giving, 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 giving. And at the end of the day, what did I give to? I didn't give to anything I own. My name's not on it. So, what do I do next? And so as a result, up until Saturday, I was working 3 jobs in place for my tech jobs. Now, I'm not advising people to do that. I just had to do that because I was in tech making six figures, and I was definitely living in a place where you have to make a good amount of money to pay your rent. And so, I had to, keep up with that for a little while. But what it gave me working three flexible jobs was more freedom. Because if I didn't want to work one day, I did not have to. Yes, there's no PTO, but I could make it up when I started to work again with another job. And so I've been able, as a result, to keep money coming in, but also build my
Mhm.
own schedule. I can travel. I said earlier I'm going to South Korea. So
I know, that's amazing.
I'm making the least amount of money I've made in almost 10 years. It's like I wasn't that making that much, but I'm making that little now. And
Yeah.
of course the standard of living is way higher now. But because I'm able to put myself first and not just give my all to one company, I'm flexing my time. I'm doing bits and pieces here. I'm able to plan and do things like that. And also another thing that you brought up, Carl, I grew up without money. I did not travel. I did not do much. I
Yeah.
went to my first concert when I was 17. I was almost an adult because this just wasn't in the budget. And as a result, I've learned how to live on less means. Yes, it was hard at first because, again, the least I've made in 10 years, but I remembered things from when I didn't have money. And I was able to do much more than I've done working a full time because I have the time now. I've been to concerts the last few weeks. I went to see Megan Thee Stallion, Maroon 5, T Pain. I'm going to South Korea. I'm going to Canada this
Yeah.
week. I won't get to see
I
Carl,
know. I won't
but
be there, sadly. I won't be there, sadly.
but I've been able to do so much because I'm putting myself first. And when
Yeah.
any of my jobs have asked for too much, I've told them no. And now I'm
Yeah.
down to two jobs because I put my foot down with one, but I'm still making money. I still get to travel. I still get to go see people, and I'm happier. And I want people to know that you can break free from this, and as long as you put yourself
Yeah.
first. And it's hard, especially if you have a family, if you have again, you don't have third spaces because all of your friends are online like me, but
Yeah.
it's doable, and we do it every day. And like, look at Carl, he's in Japan and he never invites me, but it's
You
okay.
want to? I mean, I'm listening to you, and I want to share a couple of things because I
Go
think I
for
used
it.
to share it a bit more. So, I basically, I've basically, if I went to a job right now, I think my title would be something like principal engineer or something like that.
Hmm.
It's like 200 to 300,000 a year. But you were talking about like, lifestyle and things like that. I think that's a high leverage point because, just full disclosure, I've never made more than 65,000 US in my life.
Wow.
And I think what the reason to give the number is just to give perspective. I live in a place
Hmm.
where I can afford to do that. Montreal is a lot cheaper, but I think
Hmm.
to go back to what you said is that you have options.
Hmm.
You can control your spending. I could do a whole episode on this. Like I've done talks on this, but basically you have leverage point. What I loved about your story and why I wanted to point that out is that I've made decisions. You've made decisions
Hmm.
to see like how can I build a life where I feel like fulfilled.
Hmm.
I can do the things that I love. I can travel. I can go see Megan Stallion. I can go see Maroon 5. I can do the things that I want and still feel okay. And I think
Hmm.
having that control, having feeling like you have agency, that's the word, right? You have
Yes.
agency over your life is powerful, right?
Yes.
And I think that was what I wanted to bring up with that because for me, I have agency. I never wake up in the morning like I worry where I'm going to make money, but I'm never worried about I need more or this. I know I'll figure it out because I have agency, and I think that's really
Hmm.
important too. Is like it all ties into a bit of what we were talking about. Is that you want to take agency over these things and not let these relationships, whether it's community work and things like that, um, control everything, and then you're like feel stuck. So like part of it is just whether it's looking for a new job, you're taking agency, you're taking slowly some control back. Like control is illusionary, but basically,
Mhm.
you feel like you have a way you can make it work. And I think that's really important because otherwise you feel stuck, right? Like again, it's the same
Mhm.
thing. You're like you don't realize it, and then you're like you've put so much, and then you're like, wait, no, I need to invest in myself more.
Yes.
And having the agency to do that is amazing. That's why I loved your story, because I was just like, it's yeah, we all have different backgrounds, but because we all have different backgrounds, we all have different solutions to these problems, right? So,
Mhm.
and but the step is that you took agency, and I think that's amazing. Um, because too many too many times we feel like stuck.
Mhm.
Um, and the first step is always the hardest, but it's realizing it was scary leaving a job. Like, I left and I didn't know what I was gonna do. I was like so convinced I would be okay, but I was like, I had no idea. And but I was just like, this is not a good place. Like
Mhm.
for me, I was not in a good place anymore. I was
Yeah.
just like, you're frustrated. You don't feel like what you do matters, and for me, that was really important. And so I was just like, I don't want to give anymore. And that's a bit the same thing with WordPress. Like they take and take, and then you're like, okay, but I don't have agency here. I don't have agency. So let me take agency back into my life. Let me go to South Korea. Let me go to Japan for me,
Mhm.
and, and I think that's really important because we don't, like I said, part of the workism thing is think about, we were talking about the grandparent. We don't know when we're going to stop working.
Yeah, definitely not.
We never know, right? We never know. So for me, it became really important. We're like, you need to tell me when we need to stop this podcast record. I told you I'm crazy.
I'm gonna stop you.
Uh,
I'm gonna stop you. Keep going. I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop
okay,
you.
okay. But it's all related to me. It's
Mhm.
because it's just having agency, feeling like you're not giving so much of your, like I at the same time as I quit this other job, like I remember I had a couple of, it was scarring in a way, right? Like I
Mhm.
was working with larger companies, and I had these relationships. I'm really good at networking and building relationships. I had relationships with people in these companies, and I remember at some point, um, it was a publishing company, and an editor just retired, and then he got sick, and he like died.
Mm.
And I was just like, wow, you just dedicated your entire life to this company and everything, and they treated him fine, but it's just like,
Mhm.
but you were like waiting for this, and it was just, I was like, no, can't wait.
Mhm.
Like I gotta find a way to balance it all out. Like, whether I also don't have kids. I didn't want to have kids, whether it's like having a kid, building a family, like you gotta start doing stuff and being like advocating for yourself. Like, okay, like I was just like, I'm giving so much to this company. I'm not gonna have any impact here. And I was right. For sure.
This podcast is uplifting, and we talked about a lot of hard things, but we also talked about a lot of uplifting things. So that's so awesome. But I want to end. I always like to end on advice. What advice do you have for people who are suffering from workism and they're trying to break free and find their agency?
Oh my. Okay. That you're like, oh, do you want to do an entire other podcast? I'm like, sure. Okay. Uh, but I like what you said. Like, it's really important to realize that like negativity bias is a thing. We're talking about the negative stuff. I love my life. I I'm so happy that I made that decision. So I'm happy to talk about that. I think this is a great way to end. I think what it comes down to fundamentally, if we're really honest with each other, is that it's about money.
Mm-hmm.
Your agency is about money. And if the first step to anything is to take really a good look at how you manage your money, how you do things, what are your finances, like if you have kids, if you have debt, we've all had different circumstances in life. And the reality is that I I had to do a lot of that work. Like I was just like, okay, how do I make a life for me where I don't make six figures? How
Mm-hmm.
do I build this? Because what you have to start doing is really think about what's important for you. Like the way to escape workism is to like really take stock of like your life and be like, okay, what is really important in my life? And I would just tell people like start looking into that, because what decisions you can make, how you can rebuild your life, because you've done it. And look, you're going to South Korea and you like dropped the job and you can still do it, and you went to concerts. It's amazing. It's amazing,
Thank
but it
you.
requires it's so good. It's such a amazing thing to hear, because that's how whenever I'm talking to people that are struggling with that, it's you can and when you peel the layers, it comes down to this. They're like, I don't know how to get out of that. That's the hardest first step, is just
Mm-hmm.
realizing that part of the control that this workism has on us is, yes, we invest into the company and into the relationship with the company, then you but how do you get out of an abusive relationship is when you can have the courage and the strength to walk away. And part of getting that strength and courage is realizing that financially you'll be okay, and putting
Mm-hmm.
yourself in a position where you can tell yourself that. How each of us does that is up to you know each of us essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it ended up being I was like, oh, maybe I'll have a great phrase to end this, but no, it was just like but it's like but it but it's really up to each of us. And when I gave a talk on that, it was a bit about that. It was like I talked about what I did, but the reality is that we all have different backgrounds, different privileges and everything, and it's just there's never going to be a solution for that'll fit everyone. But the reality is that that's if you really think about it, that's where the power is. And to gain agency is taking power back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to take power back, there you just have to just improve that. It's like that's why I say it's taboo to talk about it, but it's the reality, because I've met multimillionaires that I think are poor. Actually, a great way to end this. Actually, one of the sayings that I don't know who I saw it from, but it really stuck with me, is that it was like rich equals income greater than expenses.
Mm.
And I love that saying, because I know people that are like multimillionaire and they feel like poor to me. Like, because there's always money to spend, there's always stuff to buy, there's always anything, and there's just the only way to get the power back is to gain agency, is to just do it. There's no magical number, there's no nothing. It's just there's always more stuff, or you can be really rich and just be isolated. It's just
Mm-hmm.
you gotta do the work. And that's like this it's the beautiful part, because I love self-improvement, so I'm really happy about it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's the reality of it is that. And I loved your story, because it proves exactly that. It's like you were able to shed one job, and it came with some costs, some trade-offs,
But I'm
but
happier. I'm very
you're
happier.
happier.
I'm way
Exactly.
happier.
You're way happier. And I think that's the beautiful lesson to end us on, is that you've done it and it made your life happier.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carl. This was an amazing talk. I cannot wait to get this up. Oh man, thank you just so much. And you always have good advice, even though you keep forgetting that you give it to me. But it's okay. Thank you for the advice, and just
I'm
thank you for
like
being awesome.
I'm just always saying stuff. So I'm like, which one was the good advice? But now we have a whole podcast where I gave advice. So we have it recorded now.
Awesome. Well, you take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and take care of yourself as well.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hopeful Workspace podcast. If you have any questions or would like to reach out to our creator, me, feel free to reach out at naishagreen.com/contact. Until next time, have a good one.